Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May 2022 Compassion Chat. My name is Susan Marshall. I am the author of Mom's Gone Missing, When a Parent's Changing Life Upends Yours, as we know it does, and your host for these Compassion Chats. We meet the fourth Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. Central, right here on Zoom. We are recording this session. So I would ask in the initial part of this chat, if you would mute your microphones. We will open up toward the end for questions or comments or wowies, and I'm sure we're going to have many. I am absolutely honored, delighted to have our guest this evening, Dr. Cynthia Carlsson. Dr. Carlsson is a professor of medicine in the Division of Geriatrics. She's the director of the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute and the clinical core leader, said all those words right, with the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Cindy, it is truly an honor and a privilege to have you. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Susan. It's really an honor to be here. I learned so much from people I interact with over the years, a lot of the hard things, but the good tips and strategies for helping us all kind of work through these challenging conditions with COVID and Alzheimer's, people living with Alzheimer's and other dementias during COVID.
Absolutely. Well, we call these compassion chats for the reason that we're here. If they're informal, we like to connect people who are really smart and gifted in the work that they do, but mostly humans helping humans, right? Because that's what this is all about. So we like to start, Cindy, each of our chats with a little bit of your story. What led you to do the work that you do?
Well, I come from a close-knit family, and when I was in junior high, my grandmother developed symptoms of dementia. They thought it was frontotemporal, or they thought it was Alzheimer's dementia. Looking back, it probably was frontotemporal dementia. But watching her decline, her thinking abilities, this grandma who would always be the center of everything, controlling that, helping manage the household, keeping us busy in the summer with our activities, and now, mixing up, putting mayonnaise into the spaghetti sauce and not making her chocolate chip cookies like she used to, and, little subtle things, and eventually progressing to language changes. And then, over time, watching her decline and watching my grandfather, who was always a stoic family member, now having to turn into a caregiver in a world that he was not familiar with. So I think watching that experience when I was in junior high really shaped me. And so by high school, I decided I want to be a geriatrician. And so went to medical school and kept my passion for geriatrics. And even in high school, did a report on Alzheimer's disease using all these high-class, highly technical sources like Time Magazine and, its different research resources. Then kept that interest, and again through medical school started doing Alzheimer's research, maintained my interest in geriatrics, and so now I'm really thankful to be a part of the beginning of our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center here at UW Madison, and to direct our Alzheimer's Disease or Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute. And then also for the last almost 20 years, I've been served as medical director of the VA, our Veterans Affairs Memory Clinic. So being able to work with veterans, caregivers, families, going through this journey. So, again, a lot of my family interactions and now my patients and caregivers have really shaped the type of research I do, clinical care, and a lot of the work we do at the Institute.
That's phenomenal. Well, thank you so much again for the work you do and for joining us this evening. I guess based on that brief, kind of family story, probably the question on most of our caregivers' minds, one of the many is Alzheimer's disease hereditary?
So Alzheimer's disease is unique, and so there's a lot of factors that influence Alzheimer's. So they've done some studies, or they have had some twin studies where they look to see how much of it's from our genes that we can't do much about, and how much of it's from lifestyle. And so it's probably about 50-50. It's about 50% is probably from things that could be modifiable, 50% from genetics. But even with the genetics, we don't fully understand all the different causes of it. So it's pretty complex disease. There's a small proportion of people who have a strongly genetic type of Alzheimer's, and thankfully that's not as common. But you'll see those stories in the news, families who 50% of their family has it, they get it at a young age, the family in Colombia that's in the news sometimes. And those are a different kind of genetic subgroup of Alzheimer's, but most of the Alzheimer's dementia that we see is, later on in life, a lot of factors that can contribute.
Well, and one of the things that I hear a lot too is, in addition to, is it hereditary? Are there early warning signs? Now, you can talk a lot about the research that you've done and the things that we have learned just in the last decade?
Yes.
So please, share with us what we've learned, what you've learned, what we know now that we didn't, perhaps when your grandmother began to, demonstrate signs.
Right. I think one of the first things is, just the terminology. So people get Alzheimer's disease mixed up with dementia, and a lot of times they're used interchangeably. But I think what we've learned over time is to really separate out what we see in the person versus what we see in the brain. So, with my grandmother, she had, what we saw in her was some changes in her ability to function at home and changes in language ability. Well, changes in language are impacted because a certain part of the brain controls language. But if you have a dementia from a head injury, if somebody hits your head in the area where you have language, that would cause a language change. If you have a stroke in the area where you have language, that would cause a language change. Or if you have Alzheimer's disease brain changes, that would cause a language change. So we started to realize that, we need to pay attention to what we're seeing in the person, what they're telling us, what they're noticing, but also what's going on in the brain. What are those changes? Because now we know from research that those brain changes from something like Alzheimer's pathology or brain changes, that starts probably decades before those subtle symptoms, the trouble with words and, not making the spaghetti properly. Those things happen later. So, over the first case of Alzheimer's was described in 1906, and they had a meeting at NIH in 2006 to commemorate that anniversary. And, at that point, we still were just barely able to see brain changes in pathology, so in brain samples after someone had died. Well, since then, there's been an explosion of research where now we can see those brain changes in someone using specialized research scans, PET scans, spinal fluid tests, and now even maybe blood tests to see what are the very earliest brain changes. So again, we're paying attention to what's happening in the person, but we really want to see as early as possible what are those subtle brain changes way before someone gets memory problems.
How dependent are you, Cindy, on the willingness of people to participate in your studies? One of the first reactions, certainly in my family, and I know in many others, is denial. It's like, oh, dad's just getting older, or mom's just having a bad week, those kinds of things. What should we as caregivers be watching for?
Yeah, so, the subtle symptoms that we really need to be watching for are changes from what someone's baseline is. So, and it should be, cognitive changes. We all forget, like, what did we go into the room for? Or, where did I put my glasses, or common things like that. And that's not too worrisome. But when we forget how to get to our daughter's house, and, she's lived in the same place for 15 years, or if we are forgetting appointments on a routine basis, even though we have them in our calendar or posted under dry erase board. So those subtle memory concerns are the ones that should prompt evaluation. And I always encourage people to, if you come in early and I tell you that your brain is functioning well, that's good. I'd rather you come in early and might find out that your brain is functioning well, because we like to follow those people. And so with research, as a clinician, I used to see people in clinic all the time, and it hit me over time that we hadn't had a new therapy for like 20 something years, for new therapy for Alzheimer's disease. And the therapies really just helped delay the inevitable progression. So I think when I sat there in that stagnant options, here's your options. They don't do very much. They help a little bit, but I think that's what made me feel more bold in asking my patients and people to participate in research, because we're all in this together. I think whether you're a caregiver, or, a lot of times it's family members of people with dementia who come in to be in our studies because they want to figure out, how can I prevent this in myself so my kids don't have to go through what I'm going through now with my parents? So I think just realizing that it's a team effort, that we all need to be moving things in the same direction. We can't do clinical trials without people volunteering. There'll never be any single new medication approved in the United States until people are part of these clinical trials to see if these medications work. So, and not just medications, other things like exercise and other lifestyle changes too. But so I think it's really that combination of, paying attention to early subtle changes in people, but getting a part of research so we want to find those brain changes before people get those symptoms. And that's really the only way we're going to get ways to prevent it or effectively treat the disease.
So I'd love you to talk more about your studies and how you get involved. Because if somebody would approach me and say, hey, we want to do a brain study and we want you to be involved, like that, what? How do I do this? Is it going to hurt? So
Yep.
Talk to us about how you get people enrolled and the kinds of studies that you do. What's involved?
Yeah, so we do a pretty broad range of studies. So in general, our center focuses on Alzheimer's prevention. So really trying to figure out the specific brain changes that go along with dementia due to Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's, we think, is caused in part by these buildup of these amyloid plaques and these tangles inside the nerve cells in the brain. And so a lot of our work is focused on trying to figure out, why do those form and how can we prevent those from forming? But realizing that, again, it's not just those that probably contribute. There's other things like blood vessel risk factors and other types of dementia brain changes that kind of co-mix in there. As human beings, we're complex and we don't follow like one pathway. So we're trying to learn a lot about that. So we have studies for people who don't have memory problems at all, who are cognitively healthy, who maybe have a parent with Alzheimer's, maybe they have a parent who didn't have Alzheimer's. So we have studies for people, really anyone 45 and above, if they have mild cognitive impairment or dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. We really have a variety of studies for people because there's so much we need to learn still. So we have studies that are more what we call observational, where you don't take a medicine, but you're observed with cognitive testing or specialized brain scans or specialized blood tests or spinal fluid tests. So most of the things we do with our studies are pretty straightforward. So people get actually frustrated with the cognitive tests, and they're not meant to make people feel bad, but especially when people are worried they might be getting symptoms, they feel bad about doing them. But cognitive tests, questionnaires about your family, your lifestyle. We do MRI scans, which are magnetic resonance imaging, which is a specialized magnet brain scan that shows a lot of details in the brain. And then we do these specialized PET scans, which are positron emission tomography, which are specialized scans that can actually see amyloid buildup in the brain or tau buildup in the brain, which are the things that make up those plaques and tangles. So those tests, and then spinal fluid tests, that obviously people are like, I don't want to do that. I've done thousands and thousands of lumbar punctures for our studies, and people tolerate it very well. And many have told me it's better than the cognitive test. So, but that gives us extra information about the subtle changes in some of those plaques and tangles proteins and also brain inflammation. So again, really trying to get to the finest, most subtle early changes so we can do more to protect the brain. So we have observational studies, and we have a variety of treatment studies too. So for people who are like, I just want to get on something and try it, we have trials that they're randomized controlled trials. There's a chance of placebo or kind of imitation medicine with real medicine. But really a pretty wide variety. We try to help people kind of walk through what they're interested in, what their risk factors are, and see where they feel like they want to contribute in the variety of studies we have.
That's incredible. We need to make research cool.
Mm-hmm.
So people can start their fan groups, right?
Yep.
In this study, come with me. You mentioned that the disease actually starts way earlier than any symptoms present. Is there in the continuum, and I don't know if you know the answer to this at this point, but is there an acceleration point, whether it's age, whether it's diet, whether it's lifestyle kind of stuff? Have you discovered a point where it's kind of like hockey stick? it escalates quickly.
Yeah, there's so my colleague, Dr. Sterling Johnson, has been doing work with a study called the Wisconsin Registry for Alzheimer's Prevention, or RAP study. And what they've done, they've followed people for actually 20 years now and done cognitive tests over time. And then now with these new amyloid PET scans, so again, these scans that can actually see these deposits in the brain, they've been able to develop some models and see at this point is when they reached kind of a threshold where their amyloid levels started getting a little bit higher. And it seems like at that point, there's some cut point, which is different for each person, where the amyloid starts building up in the brain. And then what the amyloid does is then it starts irritating the nerve cells around it. The nerve cells get this other protein buildup, tau, and then that really that's where that hockey stick, as you referred to, where it really starts accelerating. So again, we're trying to really jump in early on. Can we slow down that amyloid deposits? Can we keep the nerve cells healthy so they don't go on to get the other changes in the tau?
Is there a nutritional aspect to this?
There is. Yep. There is. There's probably a lot of things. So, nutrition, there's a lot of things that we think are probably good for the heart or good for the brain as well. So there's a lot of emphasis on that. There's a diet called the Mediterranean diet that's really just, like it says, foods used in the Mediterranean. So dark green leafy vegetables, whole grains, nuts, fruits and vegetables. That combined with this other diet called the DASH diet, which is dietary approach to stop hypertension. Those diets have been kind of combined, and the DASH diet really has a lot of fruits and vegetables and similar approaches, but combining those into something called the MIND diet that was developed by Martha Claire Morris out of Chicago. And that diet really seems to help, again, it probably helps improve brain blood flow, probably helps kind of stabilize some of those blood vessels in the brain. And they're still trying to figure out how it works exactly, but it seems like it does help protect the brain to some extent, as does exercise. So some of these common things we know are good for us that we don't always do. Even if you had that amyloid buildup in your brain, one of my colleagues, Dr. Okonkwo, was showing, if you had that amyloid buildup, your thinking abilities won't decline as quickly if you exercise regularly. So again, even if it's there, you don't have to give up. You can just say, well, I'm going to exercise, and that'll help protect me from the consequences of that buildup.
That's interesting. One of the things that we heard from a neurologist when we took mom for testing, MCI was the diagnosis, right? So common, mild cognitive impairment. And the neurologist at the time said, you know what, it's normal aging. It's not going to affect her day-to-day life. Well, the reason we took her to the neurologist was because she was already affected in her day-to-day life. But that's, again, on a spectrum, right? So as a caregiver, when you hear that, how do you manage your own doubt, skepticism? So I guess the question here, Cindy, is as a caregiver, when do you know to rely on what you're seeing is real? Mm-hmm. And when do you say, set that aside because I need a clinical diagnosis to supersede what I'm struggling with?
Yeah, I always try to emphasize to my patients, their families, caregivers, is that what they're seeing is real. So again, if you're noticing that somebody's not as sharp as they used to be or can't think as quickly, but they're still acing some of their cognitive tests, but they're, were a business executive and probably were off the charts before they, took the cognitive tests, what you're seeing is still real. It's just that our tests aren't good enough to pick up those differences. And that's where I think the field of research and clinicians are gradually learning, but again, at different rates, we're learning at different rates, is that there's something about things that people notice about themselves that probably happens before we can pick it up on tests. And it happens a lot. So that's why with these different terms that have been developed, the term dementia means that somebody has cognitive impairment that's showing up on tests and it's affecting their day-to-day life. So they're what they used to be able to do, which is going to be different for each person. I had a patient come in who was a quilt maker and she couldn't put the pieces together in a quilt anymore. Well, not all of us probably could do that at baseline, but that was her skill and she was losing that ability. So dementia has those elements. They're, getting cognitive impairment, it's showing up in tests, and they're not functioning the way they used to be able to. Whereas mild cognitive impairment, they're having a symptom, they're noticing it, they're at least one thinking ability and their tests are impaired, but they're compensating. So they're not functionally impaired because they're using their pad of paper to write things down, or their iPhone, or they're using a calendar, or they're, using their GPS to get somewhere so they don't get lost. So they have to work harder, and they'll tell you they're working harder usually, but they can get the job done. It just takes longer. Whereas there is another condition called subjective cognitive decline, where somebody notices there's something going on. I can't multitask like I used to. I have to focus, turn off the radio, not talk to people. But they do their cognitive tests and they're okay. They're in the average range. So those people still, there's something about that could suggest something is at the beginning of development. So it doesn't always mean it's a dementia process like Alzheimer's. Sometimes it can be medication side effect or a thyroid problem or sleep problem or a mood, they're feeling depressed or anxious. So a lot of causes for these symptoms, but the symptoms are real. It's just a matter of, and sometimes they may not fit neatly into a category, which can be frustrating. Doesn't mean the symptoms aren't real and something's not going on. It's just we haven't figured out how to best categorize it yet.
One of the challenges, I think, in all of this, and I know that we've talked about it as the Board of Visitors for the Initiative to End Alzheimer's, is the stigma associated with cognitive decline, however you want to describe that. So tell us how to make it easier to talk about these things, particularly when you're in a caregiving role that you've not been trained for, right? That we don't know the language. You don't want to say the wrong thing, but we want to all get more comfortable with something that is likely to occur for many of us.
That's a great question. I think what I try to do, even in my clinic, when I'm going through a diagnosis of someone, is to think about, for them, a lot of my patients might be in their mid 70s or early 80s, and just to pick whatever age my patient is and to say, let's say I have an 80-year-old patient in my clinic, I'll say, if they're, maybe they're there with their spouse and their daughter and myself, and so maybe it's like 4 or 5 people in the room. And I'll say, if all of us sitting here were 80, probably probably about 2 of us would have some cognitive changes that would fit with a diagnosis of dementia. And most commonly that could be from something like Alzheimer's disease. So I'll try to put a little perspective on how common it is for people their age. It's not emphasizing it's not a normal part of aging, but it's more common as we get older. Just so that, and just to say, when you go out with your friends for brunch, every Friday, and there's 5 or 6 of you sitting around, again, there's probably a couple of you who are likely to have that. So just to help put it in a context that you're not alone, that there's other people out there your age who are struggling with this, but they're not talking about it. And then encouraging people to talk about it more, to say, but, as a caregiver, talking with the person who's living with the mild cognitive impairment or dementia and ask them, do you want to share with friends, or would you like me to? How would you like people to help, finish your sentence or help you find the words, or you prefer to let them, let you sort that out on your own? So helping them to feel more comfortable with bringing it up and just letting them know, because a lot of times family and friends will notice and they just won't, and the person living with dementia thinks they're maybe hiding it, but they may not be. And the person isn't sure what's going on. And so may kind of distance themselves, but just say, I have some memory problems. And so you might notice I miss a word here or there. Just be patient with me and I'll find that word. So I think just trying to help normalize it as caregivers and to help people learn that having a dementia diagnosis or a mild cognitive impairment diagnosis doesn't mean you can't go out and enjoy life. You can't make friends and have, great interaction with people. One example of this is our Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute has an Amazing Grace chorus, which is a chorus made up of men and women who have dementia and mild cognitive impairment and their caregivers. They go around to different events and sing songs for community groups, at holidays. So it really is a way to show people, like, look, these people are living with their dementia, their mild cognitive impairment, they are having meaningful lives. And I think that really helps reduce the stigma associated with that. But examples like that are important for us to start getting the message out that people still have dignity, they're still engaged in society, they still have meaningful contributions to conversations. It just might be framed a little differently.
I love that. I just love that because it's encouraging one another, to be real, to be open. That's hard for family members, particularly, who don't want relationships to change. Isn't that really kind of foundational to some of the resistance? I don't want anything changing for me because you are declining cognitively.
That's very common. And I think, even, in clinic recently, finding activities that are enjoyable for both. So people living with dementia may not want to go to the bigger parties or the bigger events. They may want to do something smaller scale, dinner with a single couple, or gardening, or something that's, a little bit not quite as overwhelming. So trying to figure out ways that you can both find things that you enjoy, but also in a way that helps the person living with the memory changes to feel more comfortable and but inclusive. But I think helping to educate friends, colleagues, neighbors helps them to feel more comfortable with, is this good or not good for me to invite them over for dinner and things like that.
Right. Yeah, that discomfort. So we know, we understand, and we accept that stress and anxiety are often disease accelerators. Is that true also for Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yes, we don't know enough about the impact of stress, anxiety on cognitive decline, but we know it plays some part. So there's research going on. So I'm a part of some national initiatives to kind of bolster the type of research we're doing across this network of centers across the US in Alzheimer's disease. And one thing we're realizing is that we don't have a good sense of the impact of stress and anxiety and depression on the disease acceleration. So we're trying to pull together the leading psychiatrists and help us to better characterize this so that we can all learn as clinicians, so that we can hopefully help patients and families better understand what role does that have in accelerating, if we treat the anxiety or depression with medication, does that help delay the progression? If we reduce stress early in life, does that delay the onset of any memory problems? So there's a lot of research that needs to be done for us to be able to help patients and families have a fuller understanding of how to manage that. But we do know from a lot of clinical practice is that having a routine, and I think all of us know this inherently, is that having a routine for someone, something that's predictable, that you can anticipate, helps us to feel less stress. But what's hard for caregivers, as I'm sure everyone here knows, is it's hard to ask for help. We want to do it ourselves. We've done it ourselves our whole lives. We don't think we need help. What I try to emphasize to caregivers too is that if you think about it, if you've been, let's say it's a care partner and a person with dementia, if you've been two people doing your own independent activities, helping each other out, doing your own activities, and now this person no longer can do those activities, but also is adding on extra work to this other person, you basically have lost one person's work ability and you've had extra things generated to that person. So now this person is having to really do 3 times the amount of care and work to keep up. And that's why caregivers, as you all know, have increased risk of health problems and stress and anxiety in themselves, which then feeds back to the person living with dementia. They can sense that too. So getting help, I always emphasize to my patients, caregivers, really try to find good partners, adult day centers or neighbors to take them out, sons and daughters to take them for a ride, breakfast buddies, all kinds of ways to give each other respite and rejuvenate each other.
So sounds like a word to the wise for all of us caregivers: do not become a screaming Mimi. because you will not help yourself or the other one. You mentioned the national reach, and actually the work from the Alzheimer's Institute and the Disease Research Center is international, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I know as a caregiver, that brings me tremendous comfort to know that wicked smart people all over the world are working on this, and that I can help support that. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so we're really thankful at University of Wisconsin to have a lot of partners. We have partners in Sweden and Israel and England and Australia, Germany, all over the United States. And what's great about this global community is it really can learn from each other and help accelerate research faster. So, for example, our partners in Sweden are leaders in specialized markers you can pick up in the spinal fluid. And so they help us to, be able to generate the tools and equipment and get our lab set up so that we can do it the best way possible to be able to accelerate the research and to partner with them internationally on new ideas, new biomarkers, or working with colleagues in Germany on how can we better deliver healthcare? How can we work in rural communities and figure out how to partner with community resources to more efficiently deliver good healthcare for people with dementia? So we're really thankful that we've had national and international partnerships. So these could be through grants funded by National Institutes of Health or Alzheimer's Association. Our university has a partnership with a research institute in Germany. And then a lot of us have appointments at different national committees that really help us foster the research and clinical care and make sure it translates back into helping patients and families. So currently I chair the National Alzheimer's Project Act, or the NAPA Council, which is the advisory council to Health and Human Services for Alzheimer's research care and clinical care and services. And so what I learned there, I can bring back to our research teams and make sure that we're aligned with other national initiatives, but also bring ideas from our participants, our families, our clinicians back to these national organizations and help them to learn from what our caregivers and our patients are telling us as well. So I think we have a really strong partnership with our international colleagues, but also all the wonderful people who are part of our studies, the patients and families we've seen in our clinics. They all shape who we are and the work we do. And we view it really as a continuous partnership across these different groups of people we work with.
One of the things that I've really been impressed with getting to know about your work is the fact that you integrate research and clinical care. You are literally walking across that spectrum and learning. It's a continual iterative learning. That is unique, is it not? Mm-hmm. It's certainly from a research standpoint.
It is, and we're really thankful. So the School of Medicine and Public Health at University of Wisconsin in Madison is the first combined School of Medicine and Public Health in the country. And so what that means is that we, in our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, as we look for better biomarkers and tests and therapeutic, some better medicines to use, can also translate it into working with clinicians out in rural communities in the state and helping train them. How do you diagnose dementia? How can you use these cutting edge tests? Your lab doesn't have the resources to operate this test, and let's take that back and figure out how can we do this test in a way that could be brought to a rural community and used there. So there's a lot of back and forth discussions, which I think really strengthens it. So again, having a School of Medicine and Public Health really allows us to work with our Alzheimer's Center, which tends to be more on the medical research side, and then our Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute, which does more training for clinicians and public health, outreach, stigma reduction, caregiver support, to really bring those things together so that we're learning from each other on both ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely incredible, really, the work, and it's exciting. So I'm going to ask one more question, I think. Yeah. I may have others, but then I want to open it up to our group here. What do you see, Cindy, in the future? What's your hope for all of this research? Because we know that this population is going to do nothing but grow. Mm-hmm.
My hope for the future is that we will have clinicians, patients, families, researchers, all partnering together to figure out their role, that everyone would be on the same page of let's be involved in research because we have to get better clinical care. So I would envision that research leading to a blood test and some cognitive tests that could be done in a primary care clinician's office, that they could help say, I think you might have dementia from Alzheimer's disease. Let's try this medication that actually halts it in its tracks. That's what I would love, is that it either halts it in its tracks or gets you back to where you were before. Or that a clinician would say, I'm not quite sure, it's a little fuzzy, I'm going to have you go to this specialist, and there's additional tests to make it even clearer, that are straightforward, accessible. I also hope and envision that there'll be better representation in our clinical trials. So a lot of clinical trials have been done in a pretty small segment of society, again, racial and ethnic, lack of racial and ethnic diversity, geographic diversity, and, people from urban areas. So it's a select group of people that tend to be healthier. So really trying to better understand, do these medicines work across the board, and people who are not as healthy, or people from, rural areas who have to be able to get to their treatments, travel quite a ways, or people of different racial and ethnic groups that might have a predisposition to certain conditions, or how does stress or other discriminatory factors over time impact someone's risk for dementia. So I think what I envision and hope is that we could go to the doctor, people would recognize the disease earlier, there would be decreased stigma reduction, people would readily get in there, get effective therapy to either prevent or treat it, and then that they would have good support network out in the community and in the clinic, that people would know what to do. They wouldn't be afraid of this. There would be the resources to help caregivers and patients alike support them as they go through this journey.
Absolutely fantastic. I do have other questions, but I'm gonna hold off and open up the floor to anyone who has a question or a comment, perhaps a story. Cindy will ask before we close again about how we might get knowledgeable about, and then perhaps even participate in the variety of studies you're doing. So open it up. Speak now, or I'll keep going.
So I'll jump in here. I've worked in senior care for 34 years, and a lot of Alzheimer's and dementia and so many different directions of clinicians and otherwise. I had the pleasure for some years of working or collaborating with Dr. Antuano in some educational presentations and talks and what have you. And one of the things that he mentioned toward the end of our some of these programs was that research had changed to the point where they now, and you alluded to it earlier, but you only spent a moment. I want you to spend more than a moment on it. He talked about there's hope in the fact that we have some control over this, and I might be using the wrong word, in terms of brain reserve, as he referred to it. And so because for so many years, it felt like there was nothing we could do. No matter what we do, it's coming, it's there, we're going to get it or we're not. And this gave, I'm using the word hope, and I use that with him. So help us to better understand what that really looks like and what pieces of this can we impact through our lifestyle and things of that sort related to all of that.
That is a great question. So there's a lot of research now that's coming out showing that, like you mentioned, that things like the diet that we talked about, exercise, rest. So there's some thought that while we're resting, our brain clears out that amyloid that causes or contributes to Alzheimer's disease, controlling our blood pressure. So there's a big study, the Sprint Mind study that came out a few years ago, showing that if you control your blood pressure, your risk of developing mild cognitive impairment or dementia was reduced compared to the other groups. So there's a lot of factors that we have control over. And so because of that, the National Alzheimer's Project Act, which has 5 main goals for so treating and preventing Alzheimer's disease, there's supporting caregivers services. It goes through developing data to monitor effectiveness. But the last one that was added just this year is on risk reduction. And so what that does is that's an emphasis, that's demonstrating there's enough evidence to support that physical activity, that blood pressure control, avoiding fall risk, things like that. If we fall and have a bleed on our brain, that's obviously not good for our brain. And then things like alcohol reduction, weight, maintaining our weight at a good level. There are a lot of lifestyle factors, and some studies are showing very significant reduction in risk. These are epidemiologic studies. So again, we have to see how these work individually. But there are big studies being done worldwide now that look at kind of these combination of health factors, so these risk reduction factors. So one is called the FINGER study, just like finger. It's for a Finnish geriatrics. That's where the Finger came in. A Finnish geriatric study, yeah, and that looked at things like cognitive training, exercise, dietary, that social interaction, and they found that there was a reduction, that cognition improved, and so that study is being replicated all across the world in different contexts, because obviously things like an American diet is going to be different than a Finnish diet. So, and what people accept in the United States will be different than what they do in Finland. That study is doing things like having people go to the YMCA on a regular basis, having them, do dietary modifications, doing some online brain challenges. So those types of studies are really going to be helpful to give us more information about how much improvement can we expect while we're waiting for those new medications that take more time to study.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to throw one more thing out there that someone sent me, I don't know, 2 months ago or so, a study, and this was a snippet of it. I didn't read the full study, but it was alluding to older adults who are napping during the day for an hour or more. And it's not replacing their nighttime sleep, but in addition to their nighttime sleep, that they may have a greater inclination or something for dementia of some sort. I don't recall the particulars of it. Is there anything in there that you are familiar with?
That could be, is that from UW? That might be a colleague of ours.
Yes,
yeah, there's a colleague who's doing some research on sleep. And again, that's why some of these association studies are difficult to tease apart, because is it, someone taking a nap in the day because there's something negative going on in their brain that's affecting them, or is it that the sleep itself is triggering that negative effect? So these types of studies can be really helpful to help us tease apart. So we have to know, should I tell that person not to nap? Is that the issue? Or is it something about their napping that's just suggesting there's something going on in their brain and we need to do something else? So these studies on sleep and these other lifestyle factors are extremely important. Because again, we want to have these behavioral interventions and have healthier lifestyles, not just to take a medicine to clear our brains out. We want to have good, well-informed, we don't want people paying a lot of money for a brain game online if it's not going to help us, or, people following rigid sleep patterns or something if it's not going to help us, although sleeping well is probably going to help us in a variety of ways. But again, that information will really help us so we can know how much to invest in that on a personal level. So.
Thank you.
So this discussion just raised really a whole bunch of flags for me with regard to caregivers and self-care. Mm-hmm. I think certainly many of the caregivers I've met over the last couple of years are givers and helpers. I had a dear friend who passed about a year ago who was an industrial psychologist. When I was dealing with this stuff with mom and dad, he said, you tell your mother she does not have the luxury of feeling guilty about doing whatever. She needs to take care of herself. Intellectually, I think we all get that. Help us, Cindy, to understand from a caregiver self-care standpoint, what do you recommend we do in the midst of the chaos and the stress and all of that of caring for someone with Alzheimer's or dementia?
what I try to do as a clinician is play up on just what you said, and that caregivers are givers and that they want to keep giving. And so even if you, like you said, you tell them intellectually, this is better for you to get rest and to take some time. And even though they know that, and usually that it's not a surprise to them, they know they should do that. I'll try to do the emphasis of, really you're doing 3 times the work, not just double. I'll give that example. And then just remind them that if your whole goal is to be there for this person and to be the daughter, the spouse, the partner, the friend, whatever your previous relationship was, if you want to be there for them, then let someone else do the house cleaning, the grocery shopping, the medication management. You be there for that person. And that's going to help, if you're in this for the long haul, which most people want to, they want to be there for their loved one, to say, this is going to help you have the most, sustain yourself to keep to being there, being present for this person in the long run. Let someone else do the house. Usually I'll start with housekeeping or something that's kind of a little easier to give up. And then just saying, if you're physically exhausted and up all night with this person, you're not going to be able, and you get sick from this, you're not going to be there for them. So again, usually I'll play up on them wanting to be the giver or wanting to be there for this person, because usually they may not listen as much to whether it's good for them or not, whether it's good for them being able to help that other person. So just emphasizing, if you get a break and can rejuvenate by going out for lunch with friends, getting a nap in or whatever you need to do, getting your daughter to stay with your husband for 3 days, you can sleep for a little while and not be up all night, or, so trying to brainstorm with them what they'll accept, but emphasizing that, most people are in it for the long haul. They want to be there for them for the meaningful things. And so, hand over the other things aren't quite as meaningful to someone else who can help out.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of yeah buts. I don't have the money for that. I don't want to, it's just my responsibility. I don't want to burden somebody else. How many times do we need to hear what you just said, Cindy, till we finally go, oh yeah, I get it. Yeah.
It takes a while. I can't tell you how many I'll keep putting in my notes to remind myself, we talked about this, and this, and we're going to keep emphasizing that. And over time, people, sometimes it takes exhaustion or a fall or something, something unfortunate to happen to get people to act on these things. But sometimes it's just exhaustion or enough people telling them, just try this, but it's hard to let other people help. But I think, I think when I was, one of my closest friends was dying from breast cancer, and I was trying to help support her husband, who was her primary caregiver, and her parents, and a friend of mine came in and offered me a meal. She's like, can I make you a meal? And so here I'm like a step outside of the care. And I realized how exhausted I was trying to be a support for the caregiver, let alone how exhausted he was taking care of her directly. So, I think that a lot of times it's not till we get help that we realize how exhausted we are and how much we need help. So
I think that's true. And I think the other aspect that I've seen a lot is just sort of the slow, gradual slide into depression as a caregiver, because you can't impact the outcome.
Right.
What words of wisdom do you have for us as a caregiver group in terms of relinquishing the false notion of control and really bringing some grace to this whole, I don't know what you'd even call it, just life circumstance that we certainly need, but that we can then share with our loved ones?
I think what I would recommend are, I over time, I gather all this information from caregivers about things they've tried that have worked. And that's what I try to share back, is the collective wisdom of all these people who've gone through this life experience. So, I've had some caregivers who will stop and think through what would I really like help with, and making a list. So when that well-meaning neighbor says, oh, let me know what I can do for you, you could pull out your list and say, well, I could use help with these things, and because most of the time people want to help, but they don't know what to do. They don't know they'll ask for help. But so for caregivers to think of practical things that would be helpful for them, and it's going to be different from person to person. And then when people ask, or to just be bold and ask, hey, I would like to go to the grocery store, but I'm afraid, my spouse might wander. Do you mind coming over and reading in our living room while I'm going to the grocery store? Having a, some people might be waiting to be asked. So just having that kind of to-do list. I think a lot of people will say, well, I promised them I would never, bring another person to the house or put them in a nursing home. But again, we can only take so much as individuals. We can bring a whole bunch of people around us in the community, and a lot of times we can keep people home, but it takes a village. It takes a lot of people to kind of come around and be able to meet that person's needs. So I think coming up with things that would be helpful for you, sharing that with family, friends, and making sure you have a way to get connected, whether it be a book club, a social group, a church group, or whatever helps you to stay connected with others and feel that human interaction is really important.
That's wonderful. I'd like to close our chat with a how can we get people involved in studies, and how can we as caregivers support the important work that's going on at the Alzheimer's Institute and the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center?
For pretty much all of our studies, we have a kind of a one-stop point. You can, and I can put that as a chat. Can I put that in the chat? Would that be okay? So we can have people volunteer for a study, and let's put that here. They have information at the Alzheimer's Center, and they'll direct you if you say, I want to be part of a study with medications, or I want to be a part of a caregiver study, or I just want to be in a registry and hear about research and decide if I want to be a part of something in the future. So they will be able to direct you, and trying to pull up the phone number too. Let's see if I should know this by heart, but here we go.
Well, when you're working at it all the time, you're not calling it, right?
Yeah.
Like when people ask you your phone number, it's like, oh, give me a sec. I don't call my.
Here we go. So this is also for the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, the phone number there. There's also information here, an email address. You can email them as well. So again, we encourage people to get on our registry. We have newsletters. There's also Dr. Nathan Chin does a lot of podcasts. So sometimes people like to listen to things in the car, learn about different conditions. We did do community lectures before COVID. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to that and do more outreach events and community lectures because we really try to make it a give back. Again, we try to share the information we've learned, and then again, in turn, people partner with us to help us find better information and to get that out. So, but yeah, again, it's a team effort. We have partnerships with people who've gone on for decades and been part of our studies, and we have thousands of people in our research programs, all doing their part. So it's really a team effort. And I can proudly say that when I go to these national meetings, Wisconsin is really well known for having strong research participants from diverse backgrounds, African American, Native American participants, Latinx. We have people from all over the state. So we have a well-respected public health department. So again, it's just a lot of team effort moving in the same direction, which has been great.
Absolutely. God bless you for the work. I know that there are people who like to make financial donations. The Alzheimer's Institute, for example. Do you accept financial donations as well?
We do. So we have our initiative to end Alzheimer's disease has a program that helps us to partner with people who want to contribute to the program in different ways. So some people want to donate their time. Some people may not feel like they can be a part of a study, but could donate toward a cause. So we've had, we had one study that we really needed to be able to collect more biomarkers, but we needed another nurse practitioner to help us to be able to really keep up with the pace that we really needed to. And so somebody had donated funding to help fund that nurse practitioner, or people who donated funding to help, get a student to an international meeting so that they could learn more about being a future investigator, or chipping in toward an expensive machine that would help us move from spinal fluid test to a blood test instead. So there's all kinds of program needs we have. And so those financial partners help us to bridge those gaps between those great ideas and then enough preliminary data to do the bigger grants. So we've had a lot of partnerships with our participants and people who have contributed to the program as well.
That is absolutely wonderful. Dr. Cynthia Carlsson, I believe you are an angel on earth. We're so pleased and proud to have you with us this evening. I want to remind everyone here that this session is recorded. Once it's online, we'll make that known on Facebook and LinkedIn. You are now part of history and just a wonderful resource for caregivers who are with us this evening and people who will find us and we will find them. So again, I thank you so very kindly for your time with us this evening. Thanks to all of you for joining us. SusanAMarshall.com is where you will find Compassion Chats, the archive, and Dr. Cynthia Carlsson. Cindy, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susan, and for leading this initiative. Again, we need more compassion chats and discussions like this. So thank you for leading this and inviting me tonight.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. We will see you next month. I'm not going to reveal who our guest is, but it's somebody with us this evening. So thank you, Cindy. Be well. Thank so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.